It is definitional that artificial intelligence is an artifact. That's what the A stands for. Artificial means that it's something that humans have deliberately built. So I think this is central to understanding how we can govern artificial intelligence and what the responsibilities are, what we should be focusing on when we're thinking about appropriate levels of responsibility. Now, because some people mistake the word intelligent to mean human, right? Intelligence is only one aspect of humans, and it's also an aspect of a horse or even an insect. So it doesn't mean necessarily to be human. Because some people make that mistake, they think that once they've made artificial intelligence, their goal is to make the system independent of them. So they try to put something in the system, for example, a random number generator, or like rolling a dice in the middle of the robot. In this condition, the human no longer has control of the robot they created, but they chose not to have control of the robot they created. So that's a different situation than actually the situation with life. So yes, you may choose to have a child. Not everyone chooses when they have children, but you don't get to design how a child will feel about being alone or being together with someone they love. Those are feelings that we all experience, and even other animals might feel that way. So the design control we have over AI is fundamentally different than the level of design we would ever have over a human or some kind of animal that we were training. It's just a different level of responsibility and a different level of control. So if this question still comes to me, then I would say machine learning is absolutely one of the means by which we build artificial intelligence. So it is the decision to build the system by training it on examples that we provide from data about the world, about our previous experience. And so, yes, it's a little different from putting a dice into the robot, but it is still not perfect control of choosing exactly how the robot it behaves, but it is a decision about what is the causality that leads to how the robot behaves. And then secondly, we still have a responsibility as developers to check to make sure that the system works correctly. So for example, one of the things that we discovered in 2017 is that machine learning that is trained off of English language found on the internet will have the same biases that English language speakers have when they work on the internet or when they type on the internet. So we found out, for example, that the word programmer is very much associated with men. And so you might not find a lot of women programmers, women's names next to the word programmer. Okay, we know this is a problem now. So it is not okay to use that kind of prediction to decide whether or not to interview women for programmers, because we know we want to make a new future that looks different from the past. So in the past, all the programmers were men. We've chosen to make a new future by agreement. So that's something that when we train the system, if we train it off of the past, of course we will get a system that will look that way. And some of the things might be useful, like being good at math or something. But some of the things wouldn't be useful, and we have to make a second part of the system and develop and test it and make sure that we make it meet the current criteria for fairness and meet some of our other goals. So that's called systems engineering of artificial intelligence. So machine learning cannot be used as an excuse not to perform good tests. Thank you for your wonderful questions. Let me apologize that as often happens in these days, construction is happening outside. So I turned off my microphone a bit there again. But on the other hand, I would love to be in Vietnam. But on the other hand, just 2 hours ago, I witnessed a fantastic discussion about this inequality matter in Tokyo. So this is my second meeting in Asia in 2 hours, which is wonderful. To come back to this question of the dark side of AI, yes, I think it's important to because the technology is something we build, it is an extension of our society. And so it magnifies our capabilities. And so some of the dark sides are just increasing our ability to do bad things to each other. And some of the bright sides are increasing our abilities to do good things for each other. And there's a constant competition between finding ways to grab power, to create safety, to create good governance, to corrupt good governance. But this is the history of humanity. This has been going on forever. I hope that information technology can be a light through which it becomes less easy to be corrupt, and a light through which knowledge becomes more approachable and more people can find it. But the truth is, as we were discussing with respect to polarization, when things are badly used, or when things go badly for people, then they reject knowledge. They choose words and ideas to side with the side who might win. I guess more like flags and less like tools. So far we haven't done a good job, or not a good enough job. You know, from 2000 into 2015. The number of people in extreme poverty globally declined massively. Something like 3 billion, 4 billion people moved from this UN statement of extreme poverty. And a lot of that wasn't so much AI as mobile phones, that a person in a village could know what the weather would be and what the value of their contributions are. So at the same time, we see these bad things, and we see governments that are being challenged from across national borders, and all kinds of worries. We also see this incredible, unusual spread at which we have gotten to vaccinations. Of course, these are not yet circulated globally in the COVID crisis, but you know, and we see more people getting closer to what their labor is worth. Although at the same time, we also see way too much power going to too few people, and as we saw before the First World War. So we may be entering a period of extreme instability in the OECD. I'm sorry, this goes a long way from AI. Maybe I should come back to that. But when I think of the darkness, that's what I think. I think, what if people work so hard on stopping us from hurting each other that they prevent us from having any freedom? So I guess that makes me the typical Western Northern person, that I worry about so much about the limits of our expression and our ability to choose what we do. But the most important thing, which I know for sure, and which has nothing to do with what country you're sitting in, is you cannot hold a machine accountable. There's nothing you can do that a machine is going to care about. So as you invent your legal systems, it is absolutely essential that we find ways to hold people accountable for developing the machines, for owning the machines, for using the machines, for how they release the machines. And it's not trivial for a car accident to tell, is it because of the people who made it that they should have made it safer, or is it because of the driver that the driver should not have been drunk? It's not trivial, but it's doable. Justice has worked on this problem for centuries. The important thing is not to allow the deception of saying the machine itself is at fault. Because if we assign fault to the machine, we are basically saying no one is at fault. And when we do that, because the machine doesn't care. So you're just saying there is no fault. And when you say there is no fault, then the strong will exploit the weak. So I don't think that's a good solution. Well, thank you. They give me the big question. I want to come back briefly and talk about the difference between humans as machines and manufactured machines. I agree that in many ways, and I can sometimes sound nihilist about this, but in many ways we are machines. But one difference is we are not mass produced. And so when we develop AI, we can make the choice to back up a system. So just like when you have a laptop, if you back it up well, then if you drop the laptop, you go buy a new one and you download the old ideas and nothing has really changed. Maybe you have a better thing. Humans aren't like that. And they're a little bit like that. You can think of children as improved parents, but of course we all know the children are not identical to the parents. So the idea of fundamental human rights is of course a human-centric idea, but it is about how do we defend humans and find ways that we keep ourselves alive and convince our governments that it's worth maintaining the well-being of all humans, not only of some. And so it's a philosophy, but I think it's one that's very good for humans. And I don't think machines need the same kind of protection because we can design systems so that they can be backed up and they can be defended in other ways. So we don't need machine rights. We can just have backups. Okay, and coming back to the wages is similar, and this does come into the government. In fact, I'll tell you a story. I was at in China. That I was invited by the Tencent to be on a panel at the Chinese World Economic Forum, and one of my colleagues, I'm sorry, I've forgotten who, said that it was his vision that he would use AI and machine learning so that the worst doctor became as good as the best doctor. You know, he was going to provide this so that every Chinese citizen had access to excellent healthcare. And I said, I love this. I'm thrilled by this vision of the worst doctor being like the best doctor. But does that mean everyone is as good as a doctor? And again, this was the communist ideal. And I pointed this out in China, and everybody was going like, well, on the one hand, wait, doctors are just the same as all of us. We're used to respecting doctors. And on the other hand, wait, yeah, that was the old communist ideal. You know, this is China now, right? Or 2 years ago, it was 2018. So I think the challenges we're seeing right now, as I mentioned in the talk you listened to with AI, is it does make people more exchangeable, again, more like machines, that more people can do the same job. But then by bringing down the wages, there can be more demands for that job. I don't think that it would be likely to get a machine translation as good as the translation here that I've been hearing. It's been fantastic to hear this terminology come back to me from Vietnamese that I recognize. So I don't think we'll use machine translation in high diplomacy. I don't think, you know, the G20 is going to ever use machine translation because the level of understanding and empathy that you need to get in there is tremendous. On the other hand, people who could never have afforded a translator now can go into a restaurant in a different part of the world, or can go into a job service if they're migrants or something. So now translation is available, not as good a translation, but some kind of translation is available to a lot of people. And now we come to the political decision. The political decision is, how good of translation is the government going to pay for now? For example, how good of translation will the schools pay for? And so then you have this decision about, given that there's now a larger range of capacities, how are we going to distribute the wealth? The wages that are happening right now, what we're seeing is this flattening of most of the wages by technology, and then a massive increase of some of the rare skills. And I do think that some of the really outrageous amounts of money that are being paid to some of the developers are a consequence of those new sectors not being adequately regulated. So not enough money is being taken out in the form of tax to repay the people who have developed the information and the data and the customers and for their infrastructure. You know, so there has to be equitable transnational and within nation redistribution, and then you won't see those wages being quite so high. I would say the steepness there will. I think there shouldn't be totally flat. That humans don't seem to respond that well. I do think there needs to be some kind of a thing, but this ridiculous steepness is an inefficiency, And the complete flatness is an inefficiency. It means that we aren't good at recognizing the extra value some people are bringing into their workplaces. So I think both of these inefficiencies can be dealt with, but we have to choose to do that. And again, that comes to politics and government and how do we enforce and negotiations between countries. If I can, thank you. I really appreciate both Professor Val and Dr. Zoom's questions. I did say earlier, I appreciate that sometimes I sound optimistic because I think we need to work on an optimistic vision, but not because I am optimistic. In the situation where we all die, then there's nothing we can do anymore. So how do we create not that situation? As I mentioned before, I am terrified of what we can do to each other. And when I say that, I mean also acting through governments. So I have 2 passports. Both of the countries that I have passports for were rated #1 and #2 by the World Health Organization for pandemic preparedness. And then both of those countries, the British and the Americans, elected governments that chose not to use their pandemic plans. They threw them out. And so millions of people died. And so this isn't, I don't, about the only way I can think of destroying everybody on the planet is through nuclear weapons. And I thought it was deeply ironic when Stephen Hawking said that AI, I think he was only saying what Bostrom had said, but he said, oh, AI could blow us all up. And it made all the newspapers because it was Stephen Hawking. And one of my colleagues, Mark Riedel, said it's pretty ironic that the only discipline that has made a weapon that could destroy us all, physics, is the ones claiming that AI is the threat. But anyway, I do absolutely think that that we are creating situations because the speed of the digital is so fast. Data that could be used for good by one person can then be used for bad by the next person. Now that was true. It's always been true. You know, the Nazis used the data that the Dutch kept to kill every Jewish person in the Netherlands almost, whereas the Belgians were disorganized, and so the Nazis couldn't do that. And it wasn't about whether the Dutch or the Belgians were evil. It was about that they had the data or they didn't have the data, and then an evil force came in, right? And so similarly, well, I'm sorry, I'll skip over that. I no longer work in the computer science department. I went to the Berlin Hertie School of Governance because I think this is the biggest problem. So I think this is worth working full time on. There isn't an easy solution. I do think it's possible that we can solve it. We have had huge mistakes in the past, but we have so far survived in the past. I think that a lot of people are going to die or have to move because of sustainability, because of the climate crisis. And I think if we can work first on finding good ways to handle these redistribution issues I was just talking about, then we have a better chance of making it less painful. But it is already painful. It is already too late in some sense. And in another sense, I'm pretty confident there will be humans in 10,000 years. I'm pretty confident there will not be humans in 10 million years, right? No species of ape has persisted that long. But I think that we can work for the foreseeable number of generations to try to reduce the suffering and to best keep the planet level, and that requires lots of hard thinking about how to improve government. So yes, I am afraid of bad government, and I have seen it. Yes, there is actually a lot of work that has been done, and a lot of countries that are putting regulatory mechanisms in place so that they can audit companies and help companies. It actually can help the companies sometimes, and try to make things more safe. And as I said, it is not that we can only trust the government, we need to also think about how to govern the government. We need transparency both in any large organization, whether it's a government or a company. We need that to be created. Anyway, my favorite example is actually, it's something called the GDPR. That stands for I forgot what it stands for. Data Protection Act. I forget what the G stands for. That's really ridiculous. Normally I can remember. Anyway, the European Union implemented it against all companies, but specifically, especially Facebook and Google. They said, look, if you want to do business in Europe, and there's 500 million people with a lot of money, if you want our money, you have to respect the privacy of the citizens. Now, why is that important? It's because the personal data is a means by which citizens can be manipulated. And it is part of the assault on democracy that we've seen. We saw that in 2015, 2016, but we anticipated it before then. These rules were in place in a long way. So right up until the GDPR, the General Data Protection Act, regulation, sorry. Right before it started, people from Google and Facebook were going around telling Europeans, we're going to leave. We're not going to come to Europe anymore. You won't get to use our tools. And we're all like, yeah, we believe you. And of course they were there. They did the extra work. And then they said 6 months later, wow, now it's easier to work in Europe. There's 28 countries with the same rules, with the same interface, stuff they could understand, as if that was a mistake. No, the EU is a trade bloc. It's first and foremost, they also want to create peace within Europe so they stop having wars, but it's mostly a trade bloc. That was the way that they were going to achieve the peace, by making everybody's wealth depend on it, right? So now they're using that to regulate external companies coming in. Okay, Europe isn't perfect either, but I think that there's no reason in principle that the strategy of the GDPR has to be done by countries that are sitting next to each other. Anybody that can be organized enough and can find ways to make sure that nobody cheats can say, if you want to work with us, we're all working together. If you're as big as China, if you're as big as America, if you're as big as India, then you can maybe just say you can't work in, just one government can do that. But for the rest of us, we have to cooperate and find enough countries that it's worth the cost to the companies that they want to still keep working with us. So if our citizens have enough money in their pockets, and if our governments work together, then we can find ways to change the way the corporations treat us. Now, it's another question, and one that is very sensitive, about whether we can also, whether it goes the other way. So can the corporations say, I'm sorry, we're not going to work. We don't want to sell something in a country where the government isn't respecting the rights of the people, for example? Is that one of the ways by which we can do that kind of regulation? It's not agreed that that's appropriate, and it's not agreed that they're well trained for that. So that's why we do things like using the UN and trying to use other kinds of cooperative initiatives between governments. But that assumes, again, that then we have to hope that most people can trust their governments, so that those governments can help with the other governments. But it's hard. We know it's hard. Thanks very much again for your engagement. I want to start quickly answering Professor Bao, and I think this will bring us actually back to Dr. Zoom in a way. But I have a question actually, for Professor Bao, but you can come to it later. You mentioned both weak and strong AI, and then you came into the discussion of the SMEs. And so I'm curious also about whether there's a Vietnamese policy on strong AI. Personally, I am skeptical of the concept of strong AI, although originally I was looking for it too. But anyway, let's talk about SMEs. Yeah, the policy of Europe has traditionally been, it's not clear France wants to keep this, that we should not have these large national champions. Now, I say traditionally, this goes back to World War II. The Allies imposed on Japan and Germany that there should be very strong antitrust regulation, that there shouldn't be large monopolies, because apparently, and my history is weak here, I'm only just learning about antitrust, the history of antitrust. Apparently, both the autocratic governments of Japan and Germany had been heavily influenced by very large national champion companies. Now, America also had some national champion companies, and they invented antitrust before they were sure it was a good idea. So way back in the 19th century, they saw this rising power, I think then of new technology too. Then the new technology was telegraph and it was oil. And so these new sectors had a lot of power, weren't paying enough tax, and individuals started accumulating too much power. And so they invented antitrust to maintain democracy. They thought democracy was the best way to ensure that the most people were protected. And so that was the original objective of antitrust. Since since it was innovated in the late 1970s, coincidentally, when the Cold War started ending, and then expressed in the late 1990s, that a new theory of antitrust, American antitrust, which is just that you need to break up monopolies to ensure that the consumers don't pay too much. This is a totally different idea of what antitrust is about, and America forced it on the Europeans in around 2004. So if I am working on this problem now with a member of the European Commission, her name is Helena Malikova. I've learned a lot from her, and I'm still learning. But I believe that this is one of the things that corporations and governments can make themselves dangerous. When you have one person with a very strong state industry behind them, whether it's oil or any other monopoly, then that can create a situation where they don't think that the most of the people are important. So I think this is the challenge for both. And I think it's something that historically Europe has solved by trying to keep the corporations not too strong and trying to keep the governments democratic. And then that's the way we've tried to make sure that there's no autocratic powers. Now, if you read the newspapers, you know we are again dealing with acknowledged autocracies within the EU and trying to decide what to do. So it isn't easy. I'm not claiming it's easy, but that has been the approach. But again, coming back to what Dr. Doom was saying, if you think that it's the machines, in fact, this wasn't, I think it was your audience that said that the machines need to be brought into balance with humans, or that they might weaken humans. I don't like to say the machines themselves are doing that. Just as we cannot hold machines to account, it makes no sense to talk about machines as responsible agents. I think this is sloppy use of AI by corporations or by governments. So you do it all the time. You put in a form and you say, this is easier, it's faster. Every person has to conform to that form. They can't express a more complicated problem. And then you reduce humans to something that's more like a cog. And so yes, absolutely, people, whether because they're evil or just because they're sloppy and they don't realize they're just trying to save money, they can crush the capacity of humans to express themselves. So this is a problem that we need to work against. And again, I can recommend some books on it, but the Re-Engineering Humanity is a book by Brett Frischman and even Selinger. I'll try to put it in the chat. But I think it's an under-recognized problem, and it is another problem that we need to work on, which is to ensure that you get the full expression of what people are trying to say to you. And you don't use the machines just to channel and say, if you don't have one of these 3 problems on a drop-down list, then your problem isn't something I care about.